Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going to embark on what I honestly think is one of the most cinematic and deeply profound journeys into human life. We're talking about the architecture of human experience, and specifically how we actually awaken in the womb. Now, for the longest time, we just kind of assumed that our psychology, our emotional resilience, and our whole sense of consciousness basically clicked on the exact moment we took our very first breath. But as you're going to see today, modern science is telling a completely different and absolutely fascinating story. So let's dive right in and explore this incredibly dynamic world of prenatal psychology and fetal neurodevelopment.
Take a second and just ask yourself, when did your very first memory truly begin? If you're like most of us, you're probably thinking back to being, maybe 3 or 4 years old. Maybe you get a quick flash of a birthday party or a family pet. But what if I told you that your absolute earliest experiences, your deepest preferences, and even your first memories were actually forming long before you ever even saw the light of day? It's wild to think about, but today we're going to see exactly how our foundational psychological blueprint gets drafted in an environment we rarely ever give credit to.
See, historically, the medical and psychological communities assumed the fetus was essentially just a passive blank slate. The old myth was that a fetus was just a biological entity floating around in this dark, silent, sensory void, completely, totally cut off from the outside world. But the reality? Decades of groundbreaking prenatal psychology have completely flipped that on its head. The womb isn't a void. It is a vibrant, continuous sensory journey. It is, literally, the first human classroom. The fetus isn't just in there growing physically. It's actively perceiving, it's learning, and it's reacting to its environment. Which brings us to Section 1, the first human classroom, and how we start building those primary foundations. To really understand this classroom, we need to look at what scientists refer to as the primary period. That's that absolute crucial window of time from conception right through to your first birthday.
Just look at this miraculous progression from a tiny little embryo into a fully formed fetus. Now, we're all pretty familiar with the physical milestones, right? The heart forming, the little limbs growing, the organs taking shape. But the absolutely crucial takeaway here is that this biological infrastructure is actively housing a rapidly awakening, sentient mind. I mean, the central nervous system is developing at just an astonishing rate. By early in the second trimester, the brainstem, which handles all your vital reflexes, is already online, while the cerebral cortex is busy doing all its intricate wiring. Think of the physical growth as simply the hardware being installed just so the software of human experience can finally begin to run.
Moving on to Section 2, the awakening of the senses, what we like to call a symphony of sensation. Because you might be wondering, how exactly does that mental software start running? Well, it happens through a beautifully orchestrated sequence of sensory milestones. The fetus actually begins to bridge the gap to the outside world way, way before birth. Okay, let's look at this timeline because it's pretty mind-blowing. Touch is our primary sensory anchor, and it starts incredibly early. By just week 8, touch receptors are already appearing on the lips and nose. And by week 12, that sensitivity spreads out to the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet. Fetuses will actually engage in self-directed touch in there. They'll stroke their faces or suck their thumbs, which scientists view as the very first precursors to having body awareness. Then right around week 18, the auditory system clicks on. The fetus tunes into the rhythmic melodies of the mother's heartbeat, the whoosh of her blood flow, and of course, the resonant, comforting sound of her voice. By week 20, taste and smell, fully active.
And yes, you heard that right. The fetus is literally tasting the world. The amniotic fluid actually carries flavor and odor molecules from whatever the mother happens to be eating. So if mom is eating a heavy dose of garlic or vanilla or a spicy curry, the fetus is right there experiencing those distinct flavors right alongside her. It's a pretty funny image, but it actually serves a vital evolutionary purpose. This creates a unique fetal filter for postnatal flavor preferences. It's a profound form of early cultural connection. Newborns actually show a marked, measurable preference for the exact flavors and scents they were exposed to in utero. So a mother's diet is literally a baby's very first introduction to their family's culture.
All right, Section 3, fetal memory and learning, retaining the first lessons. Because just sensing the environment, that's really only half the story. The really incredible reality here is that the fetus doesn't just sense its environment, it actively learns from it, processes it, and actually remembers it.
40,000. Let that sink in for a second. By the 8th month of pregnancy, the fetal brain is experiencing an absolute explosion of neural potential. The neurons in there are creating 40,000 new connections, called synapses, every single second. That is a staggering biological network, and it is hungry for information. It is fully primed and ready to start recording the lessons of that first human classroom.
Now, you might be thinking, how on earth do scientists actually measure fetal memory? Well, primarily through a process called habituation. Simply put, that's a decrease in response to a repeated, safe stimulus. Basically, if you play a loud sound, the fetus might startle, or its heart rate will spike. But if you keep playing it, they learn that it's safe, and they stop reacting. Studies show that fetuses as early as 30 weeks have short-term memory of at least 10 minutes. And even more amazing, by 34 weeks, if you teach them a sound, they can retain that specific information for at least 4 weeks. So they aren't just reacting, they are actively storing and retrieving data.
Let's look at some real-world application of this because the studies are fascinating. Take the famous Cat in the Hat study. Mothers repeatedly read that specific book out loud during their final weeks of pregnancy. Well, after birth, those babies showed a clear, highly measurable preference for the specific rhythm of that exact story over others, even when it was read by a total stranger. Another crazy study looked at mothers who watched the British TV show Neighbours during pregnancy. Within days of being born, their babies would become alert and their heart rates would calm down specifically upon hearing that show's theme tune, a reaction that was completely absent in babies whose mothers hadn't watched the show. They learned it prenatally, and they explicitly remembered it postnatally. How wild is that?
Which brings us to Section 4, the emergence of consciousness, the spark of awareness. This brings us right to the edge of one of the most profound, deeply complex frontiers in all of science. When does a fetus actually become a conscious, aware entity?
Now, there are two sides to a major scientific debate going on right now. On one side, we have the top-down model. This is the more traditional view, arguing that true consciousness requires fully mature, long-distance cortical connections in the brain, connections that don't fully form until really late in the third trimester. On the other side, modern research is increasingly pointing toward bottom-up sentience. This view suggests that lower, earlier developing structures like the brainstem and the thalamus actually allow for an immediate, basic level of sentience and awareness much, much earlier in the pregnancy. Our goal today isn't to pick a side, but rather to impartially lay out the incredible biological timeline driving this exact debate. So let's neutrally look at the actual neurofoundations presented in the scientific literature. The timeline is striking, to say the least. Pain-specific neurotransmitters, they're detected as early as week 7. By weeks 10 to 12, neural projections from the thalamus are already extending toward the developing cortex. By weeks 13 to 14, ultrasounds actually reveal fetuses making goal-oriented, deliberate movements, like twins slowly reaching out toward one another. And multiple recent medical reviews suggest that the biological capacity for an immediate, unreflective experience of pain may actually exist as early as 12 to 15 weeks. The physical pathways for sensation are being paved incredibly early, which is constantly adding nuance to our understanding of human development. Bringing us to Section 5, shaping our future selves, and the lifelong echo of the womb. So, what does this all mean? How do these early biological and sensory experiences actually shape our psychological and emotional resilience for the rest of our lives?
Well, it all happens within the context of relationship, primarily through maternal-fetal attachment. And this isn't just some nice poetic idea. It is a vital, literal, biological tether. The fetus literally shares the mother's emotional state. When a mother is relaxed, the baby is bathed in calming chemicals. When she interacts with her environment, the fetus is physiologically primed by her reactions, creating a sort of foundational template for how they will eventually respond to the world outside. They are feeling the world right alongside her. And this is absolutely crucial because that shared emotional state leaves a permanent mark. Maternal stress isn't just a fleeting emotion, it's a physiological signal. High levels of stress hormones, like cortisol, can actually cross the placenta. Studies on major stressors like natural disasters happening during a pregnancy show that this can leave molecular epigenetic imprints on the developing fetal brain. It can actually reshape areas like the hippocampus and the amygdala, which, as we know, are the brain's core emotion and memory centers. This intrauterine environment is quite literally the foundational architecture of a person's lifelong emotional intelligence, their baseline anxiety levels, and their stress responses.
There's this fantastic quote from the ancient philosopher Cicero that I think really hits the nail on the head. He said, "If we do not gain access to our existence before birth, we always remain a child." Long before we had 3D ultrasounds or epigenetic testing, there was already this intuitive understanding of the immense psychological weight of our prenatal journey. Our time in the womb isn't just some waiting room before life begins, it is the active construction site of our humanity. The way we are gestated forms the deepest roots of our future selves.
So, I want to leave you with something to chew on. Think about everything we've just uncovered today. The flavors you tasted, the voices you learned, those shared emotions that actively wired your developing brain. The architecture of your human experience was mapped out in the dark, rhythmic symphony of the womb. So, how does that very first core blueprint continue to shape who you are, how you love, and how you react to the world today? It's an absolutely fascinating mystery, and one that is well worth exploring. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.